one of the things that he said, and it's stuck with me, it influences and impacts me to this day, is that God is the scandal. And that was a paradigm shift for me that was really helpful as a theist. That that you recognize it in your own way, and then when I say it as a Christian, it sort of makes this. It does something different to this whole debate. It's not William Lane Craig versus Hitchens.
Yeah,
I'm basically just making a bare assertion. Again, like we were talking about in that with Isaiah, I'm just a mere assertion. Look, God is the scandal, which to me is just another way of saying life is the scandal. Because whatever meaning you want to give to existence, to the universe, to the world that we live in, I think we all are united as human beings, and that we can look out and we can go, wow, on one hand, what a beautiful world we live in. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, what a shit show. We're united in this experience, regardless of our alleged worldviews.
Yeah, one of the things that I find ironic in that, though, is what people think is the shit show differs a lot by culture. So, I think regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, when you look at the amount of people beheaded in Saudi Arabia or having their hands cut off or their ears cut off, you're like, that's evil, right? But the Saudis don't think it, or they would not do it anymore, right? So, like, for them, the problem is this person, like, renounced Islam or converted to another religion or is an atheist, and, like, they deserve to be beheaded at a soccer match with thousands and thousands of cheering fans, right? Reminds me very much of, like, the Roman Colosseum, right? Which wasn't just for Christians. I mean, later on it became it, but before Christianity was even a thing, Rome was executing people very publicly with lions and tigers and bears. You missed the opportunity to say, oh my. But, right? And so they would say, like, the problem isn't that they wouldn't think of it as evil, that, or not all of them, that, hungry beasts were devouring each other or gladiators were killing prisoners. The Spanish Inquisition clearly didn't think it was, or even if they thought it was evil to stick bulbs inside of people's mouths and turn them until their jaw shattered and they would slowly starve to death from then on. They found that less evil than that person being a witch or recanting the Catholic faith to become a Protestant or...
But they wouldn't have wanted those things done to them.
What? Yeah, sure.
I'm resisting the urge to... Sometimes in, like, real conversation when I'm not doing a podcast, I just say stuff like that and walk away and let people think that I'm either a genius or an idiot and that there's no in between. They're like, what does that mean? But I guess I have to unpack that a little bit, and I'll try to do it as briefly as I can. The point is that the problem of evil might really be the problem of pain. In other words, like, when I say, well, they wouldn't want to experience that themselves, for whatever reason, they were able to bypass empathy at that point. I think those guards, in other words, if they were the ones being tortured, or the people being tortured can say, this sucks.
Yeah. Something
happened in the evolution of society. I venture to say maybe that's it. Maybe that's way overgeneralized, where we're able to sit at a table here and look at what happened in Uvalde a couple days ago and say, that sucks, because if that happened to us, we know it would suck. I don't know if that's an evolutionary advancement or what? I know that in Jesus's ministry, it seems to me he was trying to point people to that kind of empathy when he said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." In other words, imagine you're the one on the cross. Imagine you're the one in the. Don't think about it in terms of. This is our culture. This is what's right or wrong. This is what we say. So these are the consequences for it. Don't. And also there's this classic thing that people who oppress people do all the time, which is they dehumanize the people that they oppress. They find some rationalization to say that like they're closer to animals than they are to them, or they're so evil that and that if we come to a place where we hold the equal dignity of every human being, then we realize more. Then we realize more and more that suffering is a problem.
Yeah, it's really hard to sort of take this down a notch from torture and beheading. It's a lot harder to steal bread from your neighbor than it is from someone you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's the problem of other. I think that's evolutionarily. It was advantageous to somewhere along the line in our ancestors to have this idea of in and out, and protecting the in and not caring about the out, because that allowed me and my tribe, and by tribe I'm saying like way before houses like African savannah. Yeah, it allowed my family and the people who I'm my pride, if we were lions, to survive, because there's limited resources. So I need that orange for me and my kid. Screw you and your kids.
Right. Your scarcity produces suffering.
Yeah.
In multiple ways, not just scarcity itself.
Right. Yeah. All right. So 18 tangents. So you don't think that there's a problem of evil within theology?
Well, I have this thing that I often wonder: is that just me? Am I a crazy person? Do I have any like people smarter than me that are thinking this? But I think that if you start with theodicy, you're starting in the wrong place. If you start with it sounds crazy for a Christian to say. If you start with this is God, who God is, and these are his attributes, and then you have to take that view and project it on the world that you see sensibly, materially. So you're starting in the abstract and you're going from the abstract to the concrete. Then you have to jump through a million hoops to justify that God. But if you accept reality as it is, then and let that sort of form. What I do is mix it with what I'm seeing in Scripture, and I'll put it this way: I don't know that religion exists at all without suffering. I don't know that if we were planted in the universe, so to speak, in utopia, would people have, they wouldn't have a need to reach out to transcendence. It's you're sitting there, you're going, I can't figure out how to eat. I did everything in my power.
Yeah. And
I still can't feed my family. So there's something more powerful than me that's preventing me, and maybe I need to appease that thing in order to get the things that I need. That's the beginning of religion. And so the problem that we're talking about, religion itself, theology itself, accepts suffering as a given and is trying to form a response to it. So Christianity is one way of dealing with not the problem of suffering, but the reality of suffering. Buddhism is another way of dealing with the reality of suffering, so on and so forth. So suffering's the given.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a rebuttal necessarily. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. So that's some awkward radio silence right there.
Christianity's response would be incarnation then, right?
Well, I mean, yeah. It would also be, it wasn't always like this. Right? Especially more literalist traditions would say, well, it was all perfect. So your utopian thing, like it was, except there was this snake that could talk / was possessed by Satan, that God allowed to get into perfect utopia after kicking him out of heaven. And that messed the whole thing up. And so the only reason we suffer now is because Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and gave some to Adam because she didn't want to be the only one. And voila, you now have death and pain and childbirth. And so last episode, which will be the next episode, I talked about how seminary, I wrote a paper in seminary and I got an A- because I wasn't a young earth creationist, even though the professor said I proved my point, and I still have the paper somewhere in my computer file. I proved my point scripturally and logically, but the earth is 6,000 years old, and therefore he couldn't give me an A. That paper was in reference to, could death exist before the fall? And I took the position of yes. And I didn't take the position that human death could exist before the fall. Basically, I don't know all the verses. There were some pretty obscure verses somewhere in there. It was like Adam and Eve were created, and they were created to eat plants. Okay, if you're like taking the story literally, like they were vegan, maybe vegetarian, no eggs though. Now the problem with that is like if you eat plants, there's lots of other living animals on those plants that you might not see. Like not even like a bug the size of a cockroach. Like you have like mites in your eyelashes that are microscopic.
But maybe not in Eden.
So then where did the mites come? Like God created after, right? Because first God creates all the animals and all the seed-bearing plants, right? So it's all there.
Yeah.
And then Adam and Eve get planted, or Adam gets planted and Eve comes from Israel. So you're eating these plants. There's a mite on it. It's an animal, right? And it gets into your stomach. It gets digested.
It does.
Right. Now we have death before the fall. Accidental death. Unless God miraculously saved every microscopic animal that went into your belly.
Well, the plants too, right?
Well, I don't think they cared about plants, right?
Yeah.
I don't think the ancient writers had the same understanding of plants that... I don't think most humans right now have the same understanding. Like, plants communicate, they potentially feel pain. It's kind of insane.
Yeah.
So, like, either that mite is digested in your stomach, or your stomach was so different that it could only digest plants, so all animals passed through you, or God miraculously protected all animals. And I'm like, well, if he miraculously protected all animals from the hydrochloric acid in your stomach, like, why do you let the snake in? Why not let Adam and Eve die, but reset the sinometer to 0 for the next generation? Right? Like, and like, you know, as I understand the evangelical Christian worldview is like, someday God's going to recreate the heavens and the earth, and the lion's going to lay down with the lamb, and we're all going to be vegetarian again, except there are some verses in the Psalms, or at least in the prophets, that say we'll eat marrow and the fat of the calf, and so you could take that to be like there's just going to be plenty and no more like struggle for survival. You could also take it as you're going to eat animals in heaven. So then there's animal that like just for me nothing right. So now that's where I think the problem of evil comes from is like we were created in utopia according to the Christian worldview. It ended, and so God's allowing all this crap to happen, and someday he's going to stop it. Well, like stop it from ground zero.
Yeah. Well, the things I've thought a lot about, and it admittedly could have just led me off the track. I suppose that this is why